speak without further ado. I'll get into the body of my remarks. Today is, of course, tonight and tomorrow is the 6th Yahrtzeit of my mom, 2008. She passed away, and as has become the custom, I try to do something every year in her memory. And as is the custom, I wasn't sure exactly what to talk about because I didn't have a particular subject. But there's always something that comes across like a month or so before and grab my interest, and a little bell goes off, ding. I said, that's what I will hopefully talk about. And I saw about a month ago, or maybe less, a very interesting article in a rather boring book, a collection of history articles in Middle Ages by Mrs. Kranzler's son-in-law, Professor Septimus from, I think, Harvard, and about something about the history of prayer and the Rambam, and that triggered off a bunch of thoughts of mine, and you're going to hear them tonight in memory of my mother, because prayer is something that we're all supposed to do, and some of us do, and some of us do less well and more well, but my mother wasn't a big lamdan, but she was a big prayer, and especially the circumstances of her life and what she went through, as you'll see before I'm done today, prayer played a very big role in some of the more challenging episodes of her times. And I'm going to be approaching it from a slightly more academic point of view, but hopefully not too much so. And therefore, without any further ado, I'm going to get right into this. The Rambam has a very famous history of tefillah, meaning the Rambam wrote in the 1100s the Mishnah Torah and covers all the laws, and one of the laws is about prayer. And as is the style of the Rambam, he's very systematic in his approach, so he tries to give sometimes an intro, a little sermonette about the subject. Those of you who were with me this last summer when we talked about Bar Kochba, I mentioned it there also. And he has a very interesting take. Yeah, thank you. The Rambam has a very interesting take on, how shall I put it, on the history of where a tefillah comes from. And I'll get right down to it, and then I'll speak about the problems connected with it. The Rambam says, there you go. The Rambam says, mitzvahs aseh, it's not a long piece, that there's a mitzvah in the Torah to pray every day, v'avadatem es Hashem Elokechem, that it says, you won't find anywhere in the Bible, thou shalt pray before the Lord thy God. But it does say that you shall serve the Lord thy God, and what does that mean? Does it mean bring him a Coke? What does it mean, serve the Lord? And they say avodah zu tefillah. It's an old tradition that says avodah shebalev is tefillah. However, ein minyan atfilas min haTorah, mishnah atfilas Torah, savein atfilah zvan kavua min haTorah. When they said prayer, they meant in totally freestyle, like the Quakers. Just talk to God, like I'm talking to you. You get it? More or less. There was no such thing as shacharis mincha ma'ariv. There was no such thing as a particular way of saying the davening. You just say whatever you want. There weren't even brachas. Once upon a time, in the good old days, you could eat something without having to make a bracha. You understand? Because the reliance was a person shouldn't be a yatz. If something is good, you say, thank you, Lord. Truth of the matter is, if we have a little bit of sensitivity and you have a nice day in Baltimore, you just say, thank you. We had a pretty good June all together. This is a basic derech eretz. And that's what the Torah mandates. And therefore, you have to conceive of a Judaism once upon a time for the first 1,000 years of its history without a synagogue, without a minyan, without davening, as we call it today, certainly without kriyas. All the things that we take for granted constitute the essence of Judaism aren't really, and once upon a time didn't exist. And so for 1,000 years, as he says, you see from Moshe to Ezra, you didn't go to a minyan, you just talk like I'm speaking now. That's what he says. That ein minyan atfilas min haTorah, lo mishnah atfilas Torah, ve'ein zman kavua min haTorah. There's no specific text. There's no time of the day, and there's no number of prayers. Elachila mitzvah kachu, but rather the mitzvah, the way God set it up, not the way we later men set it up, but the way God said it was. You should talk to God in a respectful manner. Therefore, say something by way of praise. You're really awesome today, Which the way you handled that weather, very good, And then v'yakach shol tzarachim shel kasher tchina, and then you get to the heart of the matter. I need cash. Right? I need a raise, a shidduch, a fuah shlema, a this, that, and the other. You know, get down to talk tachlis. V'yakach notzin shabbat sheshbilo, and then you end by way of thank you, which means you don't talk to God like, you talk to somebody respectfully. So you talk to God respectfully, but it's a conversation, basically, and you get down to it like that. Everybody did it any way he wanted. No, it's according to his ability, specifically. If someone happened to be educated and eloquent by nature, like we would say today, somebody really knows the English language, or as we'll see, somebody really knows the Hebrew language, you could be, you go on a great length. Might go along. You're amazing. I look at the world and I see how God runs. I see how you run the whole show, and you know the elements and the universe and so on and so forth. You know, somebody's like that. And if you were the opposite, you weren't eloquent, you weren't educated, you didn't have a large command of vocabulary. You just like this. Thank you. Everything's great. And now, remember, cats. Just send me the cash. You won't hear from me again. You know, that's all. You're looking great. I like the tie. If that's who you are. V'chein minyan atfilas, and same thing with how many times a day you pray. Once, twice, three, whatever you want, whatever works for you. Yeshem is pal pamachas b'yom, v'yeshem is pal pamim harbe. Some people would pray if the Spirit took them once a day, and some people would pray 10 times a day or 5 times a day or so forth. My grandmother, my mother's mother, we used to pray, you know, from the old school, I mean, long, long ago, and I'm sure some of your grandmothers also, with the tchinas and everything, they used to 5, 10, 15 times a day when they were so inclined, when the Spirit moved them. And the idea was, the Rambam says, you have to face towards Jerusalem, but that was it. And that's how it was for 1,000 years of Jewish history, from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu all the way through the period of the judges and the first temple until the destruction of the temple, and the 70 years afterwards when they were in Babylonia, and then when they returned back to Israel, and you came to the time of Ezra, or as some of us are familiar, Anshe Knesset Gadola, men of the Great Assembly, who reformed Judaism in some fundamental ways. And I'm dealing now only with one of these reforms, because as I just said before, if they transformed the Jewish religion and culture from one in which there was no such thing as a synagogue, with everything that goes on. Imagine, once upon a time, there wasn't a chairman of the board, a president, a rabbi, all the rest of it, a chazan. Didn't exist. Okay? No smiles. Now, and then you replace it with a very different model, so you see that's a fundamental reform of the Jewish religion. Why? Kivan Shagol Yisrael b'Nebuchadnezzar Russia. When the Jews, who had been in Israel for 1,000 years, Yeshua, Shoftim, Shmuel, Malachim, all those periods, the Jews had their ups and their downs, but they lived in Israel. But then they didn't. They were exiled. The 10 tribes of the north were wiped out. We know where they are today, but the rest of the tribes went to Babylonia in time of Nebuchadnezzar. Nisarbu b'paris v'yom v'shar umas. And the Rambam says they went into a diaspora, meaning Jews for the first time in 1,000 years found themselves in a foreign culture in various places. So once upon a time we lived in a place called Egypt, and we had a lot of trouble with that. Then we got out of Egypt and we ended up in a country called Israel. And then we ended up back in places like Egypt again, in Persia and Greece and around in various countries. And the Rambam says that children were born in these foreign countries. He doesn't exactly say intermarriage, but it's something like that. You know, he kind of hints at it. And the interesting argument he says is that the children grew up with a confused language, which I take to mean that they, like when I was much younger, I used to have a lot of people in Baltimore and elsewhere that came over from Europe, and they didn't know Yiddish perfect, and they didn't know English perfect, and they didn't know Polish perfect. And whenever they talked, there was a little of this, a little of that, and a little of the third things. Gay Ebbs Kafenmir, something from the store, you know, to Essen for supper. You know, there were a lot of people like that. And There is a beautiful language called Yiddish if you really know it. My parents know. And there's a language called Hebrew, there's a language called English, but if you mix it all up, says he puts it, called Echad Mo'reves Milshonas Harbe. And therefore you had a whole generation of Jews growing up speaking not multilingual, which is a plus. You know English, you know Hebrew, you know Yiddish, that's a good. But a mishmash of all three, in which you can't say a single sentence in a single language, and if they tried to express themselves, they weren't able to do so without making a lot of mistakes, and that means you're greatly reduced in your ability to articulate, and it's sad, because when you meet a thoroughly uneducated person, they are trapped in what Saussure, the famous Swiss scientist, said, the prison house of language. A person that knows only 200 words is a pitiful creature, but there are plenty of people like that. Shen Emar, and the Rambam goes on to quote a pasuk, U'b'neihem chatzim medaber Ashdodis, their children, half of them spoke Ashdod language, Ve'ena makirin ledaber Yehudis koloshen am ba'am, and they couldn't speak Hebrew, they didn't understand Hebrew well, koloshen am ba'am, and the language of people and people. That's a very confusing pasuk. I'll get back to it in a minute. U'mipnei zeh, I'm almost finished. Because it is, kishe'echem mispalel, when one of them would pray, because the Jews have to pray, it says, at least once a day, tiksar lishono lishol chafotzav lahagid shebach HaKadosh Baruch b'lashon kodesh ad sheyarav imo lishonos acheres. He was unable to talk to God. He was unable to express himself well in the Hebrew language without mixing a whole bunch of other words in it and making a linguistic mishmash of the whole thing. And that was bad, apparently. V'kiven shara Ezra based on a kacho, and when Ezra and the big rabbi saw this situation, they said, we got to fix it. Omdu v'tiklim shmona esrei brachos al Torah, al Seder. They invented something called the Shmona Esrei. The idea being a template. Shalosh rishon shevach l'Hashem shevach shachma hodav emsos shelos kol dorm shein obas l'chol echav seish l'chol tzibur kulan. You know, the first three brachos, the last three brachos, and the stuff in the middle that we do every day in the Shmona Esrei. Praises and thanks, and asking for particular things, Rifleinu, Baruch Aleinu, and all the rest of it. Kidei she aruchas b'fi hakol, and this was done specifically for linguistic reasons, so that at least everybody can be a baby Shakespeare. Right? You don't necessarily have to be the most educated and linguistically gifted person in the world. Anyone can memorize, after all, Rifleinu Hashem b'nei Rafei Hosheinu Nil Shegisi L'Seinu Lato. And therefore I need a full shlema, or somebody needs a full shlema. Anybody can say, Slach lo anu v'ki chatanu m'chalanu kivashanu. It's a short. All these things, as I say, are like a certain template to learn. V'yilmadu so b'meheron, they could be mastered pretty quickly. V'tiyat tfilas elu ha'ilgin, tfilas shlema k'tfilas ba'aloshan hatzachor. And so that the prayers of these people who are inarticulate would be as, tfilas shlema would be as full of prayer as those who are bali loshan hatzachor, as well as those who are masters of language. And this is the reason, that's where all the brachas come from. That's where all the davening comes from. Interesting. This is the reason they invented formal prayer, to endow the people who don't know Hebrew well with the ability to speak a basic Hebrew well in the prayers, which is quite a statement over here. He's saying the whole business of formal prayer is to help with this linguistic business. So it's all very nice, and I've used this many times, but I was stimulated, as I say something I read not long ago, to ask you a very good question. I said, where does Rambam get this from? How do you know this? So the average person says like this, he's the Rambam, he must know what he's talking about, But it's not in the Gemara anywhere, you understand? And he quotes a verse in the Bible, but it's not so simple at all. The passage he claims to get this from, or he does get it from, is from the very end of the Bible, from the very end of Nehemiah, because if you follow through chronologically, the last book in the Tanakh is Ezra Nehemiah. And being that it's a Jewish book, it doesn't end on glorious hosannas and all the rest of it, but rather it ends with Nehemiah, who was the Jewish governor of Jerusalem, getting into fistfights with his Balabatim. Okay? And he says specifically, Gam Bayami Mohem, this is the very end of the whole Tanakh. He says, in those days, Yeah, if you look at Chaf Gimel over there, by Yom Mahim, Ro'isias Yehudim Hoshivu Noshim Ashdodis Ammonios Moavios. Nehemiah was a great guy, and he put together the walls of Jerusalem, and he organized the Jews against their will, and he had to fight and kick to make him do the right thing, and he did so, and then he made a mistake. He went on a leave of absence. In other words, he went back to Persian court for a while because they wanted him. He was so talented. And he was away for a while. And when he came back, like a principal leaves the school for a week, everything fell apart. You understand? He describes this. And so even earlier in the book of Ezra and in Nehemiah, they had a whole campaign against intermarriage, which was a big problem at that time. Nevertheless, they fought against it and they stopped it. But as soon as he left, he said they were back to the old tricks, and people married these women from Ashdod and Ammon and Moab. Ubenehem chatzi medaber Ashdodis. And there's that verse that the Rambam quotes. And the children who were born to these had a Jewish father and an Ashdod mother, or whatever, or vice versa. And the children, Chatzi Medaber Ashdodis, Ve'ena Makirin Ledaber Yehudis, Koloshan Am Ba'am. So how do you translate that? That's a hard one. Let's go to the next one over here. This I just picked off a line, just a translation. As you see, they married these women. Half the children were speaking Ashdodite, and they didn't know how to speak Hebrew. And so was the language of every people. Meaning, the pasuk does not actually say what the Rambam says, his interpretation. It doesn't say people were not able to speak a single language, right? It says something different. It said they didn't know how to speak Hebrew, and so was with the language of other people. The Rambam wants to say that they spoke a bad Hebrew. You see? And it could be read that way, but it doesn't seem to be meaning that. And how do you build a whole history of prayer from such a thin reed? How does this go? To pursue this question is to discover some major insights into prayer in Judaism and in Jewish history. How old are our prayers? I mean, the Shemona Esrei and the accompanying prayer. I mean, the siddur that you and I have, and by the way, get me an Art Scroll English siddur. I'm going to need it. He says, what's physically the oldest copy that we have of Shemona Esrei or something like that? Not so old at all. They were around long ago, but if you get down to if you get down to what's physically there, it's not that old. The Seder of Amram Gon, which is the first official siddur that we know was published, was in the 800s. That's, not that old. And I know the Gemara talks about the Amidah, but the Gemara doesn't give the actual text. So it's an interesting question. You and I use the siddur every day, but we never ask ourselves, who made this and where did he get us in the specific form that we have it. So historically speaking, what are the oldest prayers that we can date? You know what I mean? When you show me archaeologically or something, the oldest actual wordings. And the answer you end up is kind of interesting. You get piyutim. Isn't that interesting? Piyutim are older than tefillah. Now, not really, but the oldest texts that we have that we can date are not from the prayers, but from the extra stuff they say in shul sometimes. Or maybe I should say like this, that they don't say anymore. The oldest text is not tefillah. But what's that? Yeah, a little thing like this. Okay, exactly. You can pick out of the Gemara a line in brachas here and a line there. No, I'm saying Shemona Esrei, which is the fundamental prayer. The Gemara talks about it in broad terms, but doesn't give you an actual text. And so we end up with the world of piyutim. Basically, as you can see over here, an entire science of piyutim, an entire subculture emerged in Judaism long ago, in the 400s, the 300s, the 500s, the 600s CE. That's a long time ago. That's before the Gemara was put together, or around the time that the Talmud was put together. And it's all in Israel. There are different types of piyutim, right? Some of them is krovas and the chazaras hashatz, yotzras in there, the slichos over there, the kinos, as we all know, on Yom Kippur. These texts we have are older. Tisha B'Av. He says these texts we have are older texts than you have of, fundamental praise that we have in the siddur all the time. Where did they come from? These originated when Israel was under the Romans. Okay, Roman Empire. we start to have real records of these during the centuries when Israel and the Jews were part of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. And if you know your history, I don't want to bore you too much, used to be the Roman Empire, which eventually in 300 split into two halves, Western Roman Empire, Eastern Roman Empire. So, as you can see, here's Eretz Yisrael. So Israel is part of the Eastern Roman Empire, since its headquarters was in Constantinople, but the old name of Constantinople was Byzantium, so it ever came to be called the Byzantine Empire, which is equal to the Eastern Roman Empire. And even when this part went down the tubes, the Western Roman Empire fell in the 400s. The Eastern Roman Empire went on, technically for another 1,000 years, and in practical terms, another 500-600 years. Okay? So it's kind of interesting. And Israel was under the Eastern Roman Empire till the 600s. So I know when I start talking about centuries, people's eyes glaze over, but I can't help it. Chronology does matter. And so for our purposes, 300s to 400s to 500s, early 600s, was what they called when Israel was under Byzantine Empire. Very important and sad era for the Jews of Eretz Yisrael. I touched on it a little bit last year when we talked about the Bar Kokhba time. They used to have a big center of Jewish culture there, Tanoim, Amoraim, and then the Romans killed them out, physically killed them in the 300s. In the 360s, it was a general Ariscanus who killed all the rabbis, and that is why the Talmud Yerushalmi comes to a sudden end then, and the Talmud Bavli, for those who know, goes over another couple hundred years, which is the main reason why we all live under the Talmud Bavli today. And imagine Israel, again, some people are going to smile at this, that means for the next 300 years, you had a Jewish life without rabbis. Okay? And I mean, in other words, with seriously knowledgeable people, which is kind of interesting. Jewish life without rabbis meant that it's whatever the local people decided was appropriate for Judaism gets in there. This is why, if you've ever been in Israel, and I know everybody has, you go to the next item here. You've all been in that shul upstairs in the Galilee, haven't you, in Beit Alpha? Right? Many of you have. And you see over there zodiac signs, pagan signs of Apollo, and various avodah zarah. It's an Orthodox shul. Right? I mean, I'm serious. So how do you get idol signs, astrological things on the wall, and various other un-Jewish kinds of mosaics in what's an Orthodox shul? And whenever you go to Israel, the tour guides try to give you this, that, and the other. I don't know what they're talking about. The bottom line is, this all dates from the Byzantine period, and there was nobody to say what's right and what's wrong. And you have what you call syncretism, which means you pick up from all the communities around you. If it was left up to the average board of directors, as was the case in America with synagogues 50, 60 years ago, there are a lot of questionable items that end up in synagogue architecture. There's a whole history of this. Should you have lions on the paruchas, Should you have yeah, I know. And should you have these kind of paintings and should that kind of bit? That's part of Jewish architecture. Should you have, like you had in the American South, a synagogue built in the shape of a cross? All kind of things of this nature. And Savannah, all kind of businesses, what we call the Balabatim, are in charge. And this was true in Israel for a couple hundred years. That means that the Jews are living in the Byzantine culture, meaning the Eastern Greek kind of Christian culture, which is still around today, and where the Jews were totally surrounded by this. So imagine a Middle East before Islam, because that's what I'm talking about. There was a huge area in the Middle East, and this is before Muhammad came along. And the dominant religious and cultural influence wasn't this Arabic stuff, which is so pervasive, obviously, today, but something else. And it was this Greek Byzantine stuff. And if you know anything about, if you have any Greek Orthodox friends or whatever, their davening takes twice as long as an Orthodox shul. And if when they get together, no, I'm serious, it's a 4 or 5 hour business. And they like it, or at least they say they do. And it's full of lengthy religious prayers. It's full of obscure liturgical Greek language, meaning the kind of language that the average Greek person doesn't speak. It's called church Greek and all that. Very referential. This obscure, lengthy, and heavily classicist referential style was hot back in the day. So don't be surprised if Israeli Jews who live in these centuries get into it also. So I'm trying to describe to you a world that's going to seem strange to us American Jews today. People said the davening too short. is not enough piyutim. How do we make it longer? It says taking too much time. See, I got to get out the looks of disbelief. Again, you look. This is the zodiac, and the different tribes or whatever. These are Greek, Byzantine, pagan, semi-Christian motifs that end up physically in the synagogues. It's also going to have something along those lines in the prayers themselves, even though the Jews are going to tweak the prayers in such a way that they won't have the idolatry. Remember, there's an absence of real poskim after the massacres that the Romans perpetrated, but you do have piyutim. And as far as we can tell, and that's all we can go by what we can tell, by the record, Israel, which is still an important Jewish center at that time, is not a headquarters of Talmud, because that's in Babylonia. It's not a headquarters of Shas and Poskim and the sorts of things that we typically today define as the essence, the heartland of what real Judaism is. So what is going on in Israel? There are Jewish communities, important ones there. It's something different. What do you have over there? At the heart of it lies the world of the prayer and the piyutim. Isn't that interesting? You have, from this period, the big three. Okay? Yosef ben Yosei, Yanai, Elazar, Kalir. I know these are not household names, but you'd be surprised that their compositions are household compositions. You just don't know who they are. These are not regular poets. They're liturgical poets. They write tefillos. And they add them to the regular davening because the davening is too short. You know what I said? The davening is short. And we have records in the Geniza and place like that where synagogues say, I heard there's a new piyut out there, send it to us so we can incorporate it into prayer book. This is the reverse of how they think today, right? Which is, can we drop this? Can we leave this out? And all the rest of it. Now, by the way, I want you to understand, it doesn't mean the people actually understood what they're saying. And this is really interesting. It's a culture, and this is very much the Byzantine culture, because the language is not the language. The saying of the words, the tunes, and all the rest of it, is what evokes the religious feelings. You don't actually have to know what the heck you're talking about, which is kind of funny. We have today a different sensibility. I'm trying to introduce you into a world in which there was a different sensibility. Not long ago, we had the Yahrtzeit of Rabbi Yahrtzeit, and Chava had this piece translated. You can, if anybody's in it, I can show you later. Rabbi Yahrtzeit wrote like an intro to Tehillim, and Rabbi Semenis is working on translating the other parts. And he's talking about Tehillim as it used to be said in Galicia and Eastern in the old days. And Tehillim was recited. Nobody knew what there actually means, meaning the average Baal Golan got up 4 o'clock in the morning to do a Chevra Tehillim, which is what they did over there. People got up 4 in the morning to go to shul, even in winter. Tehillim Zogan, as they say. They didn't know what, a lot of these psukim are. Doesn't matter. Don't be so American for a moment, right? Step out of that, if you can. Now, Yosef ben Yosei, not so well known at all. Yanai, very prolific, but nobody knows that he wrote these things. Well, I know you know that from the Passover Haggadah, don't you? How about Al Chay Shechatonu L'Fanecha B'Onus B'Ratzon V'Yal Kulam? They'll come from Yanai. V'Chol Ma'aminim Shehu B'Ochin Kloyos. These are old things we say. They go back to the 400-500s. That is a long time ago, my friends. How come no one's heard of this guy? Well, they say because he murdered his competitor. He didn't like Elazar Kalir, who was the other guy. And the story goes that he thought he's getting too popular. Therefore, he put a scorpion in his shoe. When he stepped in, got bitten to death. And that was the end of him. Therefore, the Jews didn't develop such a like of him. Is that story true? Who knows? Ephraim Abun, one of the Bali Tosas, writes a chronicle in the Middle Ages. He's the same guy who writes the story about Amnon with the Nasana Tokef. Although, if you look at many modern scholars of this sort of thing, they'll say Yanai wrote Nasana Tokef, And you get into the question of these old piyutim that are part and parcel of who we are. Now, I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about in order to understand what piyutim can do in a way that prayers don't do. If I were to ask you, honestly, what's the most impressive part of the davening of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? Most people would say Nisana Tokef. And it's not a prayer, it says piyut. It's extra. You go to a Sephardic synagogue, they don't have it. Interesting. You go down with the Iranians, for example. You say, what happened to the Sana Tokef? It wasn't, right? And it's kind of funny because it's not part of the tefillah. It's a real piyutim. And really, you can get rid of it. Oh, no, you can't get rid of Sana Tokef. That's when everybody cries. Who will live and who will die? Me bekitzo, me below kitzo. Oh, that's it. Malachim yechafezun. What about the part of the tefillah? Oh, that's good too. But the Sana Tokef, I don't want to miss. No, I'm just trying to show you how a later piyut, a liturgical composition, can grab the public in a way that the regular formal prayers aren't. Why don't they incorporate formal prayer? This is the evolution of Judaism that I'm trying to share with you. And as I said, one of the famous historians of the 1000s said that he murdered the other guy. I'm sure it's not true. The third one of the big three is Elazar Kalir, who lived clearly in the 400s, 500s, around that time, which means long, long ago, in a time very obscure in Jewish history, which is why the Bali Tosa studies from the Tanoim, and another one studies from the Amoraim, and another one studies from the Middle Ages. They got it all wrong. But we found in the Cairo, Geniza, and places like that, the time he comes from. And it's during this period that I'm speaking about over here. And Elazar Kalir published hundreds of poems, and they all got in, or a lot of them, and you just don't know it. And these become part of the davening, especially slichos, kinos, krovas for those who say them, the extra prayers in Purim. In this shul, we still say a lot of piyutim. All the shuls don't. Most of it goes to Elazar Kalir. Who is he? We don't know, but we know his style is kind of funny. It's obscure, it's shticky, and it's highly elusive, and he murders the dikduk. This is famous. Okay? And this is the one who took off. But he was immensely popular, because after all, my friends, who knows dikduk anyway? There you go. Don't raise your hands. I want to see how many liars there are. Anyway, right? So basically, he creates a kind of a new form of Hebrew, if you want to call it that. Now, I want to tell you something. In modern times, like in English, once the English language became very codified, so then you could do things like Jabberwocky and other. You can do weird things with the English language and play around with words. But not long ago. He's already doing this, as they say, long ago. And later, as I'll show you in a minute, it became very criticized, but for a while it was there. And they all call him Mr. Otzkotes, because here's a famous thing you say on the piyutim of Parsha Zachar, just for Purim. And he created a bunch of words. And it's extremely loose. Otz kotes, ben kotes, ketutze, lakates, bedibra, mafotes, retutze, lerates, leis, balalotes, pulos, lelates, right? Now, what is that? Now, obviously, he's playing on the tzadi part. But, what does he mean? These are not actual, most of them, some are. Those are not actual regular Hebrew words. And you have to really decode them to understand what's going on. Let's go to the next post over here. I looked it up online, and somebody says, Otz means me here. If you know, Vayitzu Malachim. So, that's an obscure word. He rushed. Kotes ben Kotes is Haman. Why? If you know the Yerushalmi Yevamos, there's a popular source. It says that, exactly, that's my point. He says, Yerushalmi Yevamos. So it says that, why did they mention Haman ben Hamdosa? His father's name really wasn't Hamdosa. The answer was a Kotes ben Kotes, a killer, son of a killer, Rasha, the son of a Rasha. Oh, so everybody knows from the Gemara that Kotes ben Kotes is Haman. And the Ketzutze are the Jewish people who are cut. They're circumcised. Lakatze, you see what I'm saying? Notice you need a whole, what's the right word, decoding operation to just get at the plain meaning of it. Now, you and I live in America in a modern luxury, what shall I say, capitalist era. There we have something called the Art Scroll, and I do this in shul, and why not? So, whenever we do the piyutim, I said, make sure everybody gets, I'm serious, make sure everybody gets an English Hebrew siddur, and look at the English. That doesn't mean they get it right all the time, because they don't. But the Art Scroll realizes like this, it doesn't matter. Who's going to get them? There's always one or two weirdos, but they're so weird, their critiques aren't going to care. For example, he says over here, Utz Kotzeis ben Kotzeis. The Kotzeis becomes rushed. The wicked reaper, Amalek, descendant of the wicked reaper, rushed to cut down the circumcised nation. Well, it's not. That's a mistake. It's not Amalek. It's really Haman. Who cares? You see what I'm saying? But at least you get a kind of a coherent English text out of the whole thing, and that's all the person wants during the time that they're droning on with these piyutim. So there's America, there's capitalism, and all these things come together in very interesting ways. This is an Eretz Yisrael phenomenon. Okay? You and I are not so used to this. We are Babylonian Jews. The customs, the laws, the practices, even the beliefs are profoundly Babylonian in nature, and the original Israeli Judaism, at least of the kind that existed during the period I'm talking about, a lot of it fell into desuetude. Most people don't. I mean, it's really like for a PhD kind of conference or something like that. But not the piyutim. The piyutim we have with us. And in Babylonia, a more Talmudic, rigidly halachic sensibility reigns, thanks to the Gaonim, and they're always coming from, as I say, a very legalistic point of view. Who says you're allowed to put a piyut in the middle? It's a hefsek, right? Who told you you're allowed to put something in before a bracha? That's the kind of language you get out of Babylonia. The great yeshivas in Babylon, in time of Rabbi Hai Gaon, they say, oh, we throw out all the piyutim that's all written by fools. That's what they write. You see? And it's anyway, not supposed to be in the middle of Kriya Shema or whatever. Now, this obscure style carried a certain authority precisely because of its obscurity. And it appealed to elites, because only the elites can decode the words, although their numbers must have been very small. So in every community, there was always two Rabbi Yosef Samsons who would say, oh, this means the Kotzeis ben Kotzeis, and all the rest of it. And the rest of the public is like, whatever. You see? By the high Middle Ages, by the time you get to the 1000s and all that, the piyutim of Kalir dominated the auxiliary liturgy the way it does today on Tisha B'Av. After all, soon we'll be in Tisha B'Av. I hope the Mashiach comes before then, but if not, we're going to be doing the kinos. And most of the kinos, not all, but most of the kinos, are these highly obscure sorts of things, which is why every rabbi, whoever gets up on Tisha B'Av, says, well, this word means this, and let me see what the art scroll says. And this word is an allusion to this and this medrash or pasuk over here, and it's that sort of, and everybody's going, right? What are we going to do? Here they have it. And the result, by the way, is that the successful rabbi speakers will say, well, we're going to do 2 piyutim this year. We're going to do 2 Guinness, and then we'll talk about the Holocaust, okay, or something like that. We'll talk about the 3 boys that got killed, right? Because this is not an American sensibility. But it was for a long time, and it dominated the Jewish world. However, things happened, and by the 7th century, the 600s, the Arab Muslims conquered much of the world. You go to this great Arab empire, which, this is the caliphate from India to Spain, right, to the Atlantic Ocean. If you read the papers, right now, you have these groups, what are they called, Islam, ISIS? Yeah, right, because it was going to pay. They saved me the trouble explaining what the caliphate is. They just declared, in other words, this is what Al-Qaeda and everybody else wants, at least for starters. Once they get that, then they go here and they go there and all the rest of it. And if you're a Muslim, it doesn't get better than this. But the Jews lived in this, didn't they? And the Arabs, when they conquered this huge area, basically only here, only the Jews in Asia Minor and the leftover remnants of the Byzantine Empire were not part of this. They remained under Byzantine cultural influence. Most of the rest of the Jewry came under Arab and even Muslim cultural influence. So here, let's take the next one. The Byzantine Empire ended up, instead of being this whole area, just this area at its height. And so Jews who lived there still were in the world of Kalir and all that sort of thing, the piyutim that I just described. They still lived in ancient Israel Jewry kinds of ways of thinking. But the other Jews did not. Now, that means that rove of the Yidden were exposed to Islamic and to Arabic heavy influence the way you and I are exposed today to American and English language influences, which is why this speech is being given in English language. Correct? And most of the references I use, if I want to be understood by my audience, I have to talk about American and other sorts of cultural icons, don't I? And when you say, but I'm a religious Jew, I have a yarmulke or something like that. That's true, but nevertheless, you're very heavy American. Just go to Israel for a week, and you'll be reminded of the difference between you and the Israelis. And the Israelis are very heavily westernized, increasingly so. You go to Meir Sharm, I don't care what they say. The guy's walking around with a little phone. You see? So notice cultural influence is what it is. And the Jews were heavily under this Arabic stuff. The Arabs during the period I'm talking about had a golden age, meaning when they conquered the world that I just showed you in the previous map, they had a great age of literature, of poetry, of science, they created things like algebra, right, and other mathematical kinds of notions, the Arabic numeral, and they were in love with the Arabic language. It's a famous feature of who the Arabs were and are. Because to them, Arabic is Lashon Kodesh. That's what God took to Muhammad or something like that, right? So to them, it's the most beautiful language. Linguistic studies, grammar studies of the sacred tongue proliferate throughout the Arab world, from Spain to India. Oh, do you know in the Arabic you can say this way, all this and that and the other, which to you and I, we don't know Arabic, so it doesn't turn us on. But to them, it was like a big, big deal. There was a sad contrast between what the Arabs are doing and the Jewish ignorance of Hebrew on many levels. Like today, most Jews outside of Israel don't know Hebrew. And there are plenty of Jews in Israel don't really know Hebrew, but they know, modern Israeli spoken Hebrew, right? And the idea of, let's study the Hebrew language as something special and beautiful didn't exist. By the 10th century, by the 900s in other words, there was, among Jews living with all this Arab stuff all around them, especially in Baghdad, a Jewish desire arose not to culturally ignore, but to culturally compete. So in the beginning, they said, the Arabs are going, we don't care what they do. But you just saw that they're turning out great works of literature and science and culture, and we aren't. And simply saying, it's a good thing. There rose among many Jewish intellectuals the idea, let's do something in Hebrew. This is a cultural process that begins with Saadia Gaon in the 900s in Baghdad, but reaches its apogee in Muslim Spain, what they call today the Golden Age of Spanish Jewry, in the 900s to the 1200s, which we spoke about a couple years ago. Jewish intellectuals in these places, so the main place is right there. We call Spain, that time Andalusia. The Jewish intellectuals over there juxtapose Hebrew and Arabic. They notice the lavish attention paid to Arabic and the indifference that Jews unfortunately display towards Hebrew, and they feel ashamed. They roll up their sleeves and they undertake the intellectual task of reviving Hebrew in order to show it's Hebrew and not Arabic, which is the Lashon Kodesh. It is Sarah and not Hagar who is the mistress, even though Hagar is the one with the baby and Sarah's childless. That's the language they used. You see? Because that's the biblical story, which they see as an illusion of their own times. Hagar was the slave who got too uppity. And then Abraham had to throw him out and all the rest of it. But why was she uppity? Because she had the baby and Sarah didn't. The Arabs have the power and we don't. Why can't Israel be 100 countries and the Arabs be one country? We beat them up. Doesn't work that way. You see? I have in front of me, and you have in front of you, something from my favorite poet from Spain, Dovid al-Kharizi. The Tachkamoni is his famous book. He's a wonderful poet, and as a matter of fact, I used some of his lines for my mother's tombstone. My sister had her idea, so my mother actually has two tombstones. So if any of you ever go there, it's a tribute to family harmony. You can. Menashe was there, right? Because your father's buried right there, yeah, above there in Har Menuchos. I'm a Kohen, so I can only look from a distance. There's one here with my nosach, and there's one standing up with my sister's nosach. And Dovid al-Kharizi was a famous Jewish poet, lived in the 11 early 1200s, master of Arabic and a master of Hebrew. And I don't want to go on too long because I could go for an hour on Dovid al-Kharizi. And he writes this fat book here, among others, Tachkamoni, which is 50 masterful poems, where he does all kind of things in Hebrew and together with Arabic. And he says, I'm writing this poem because, doggone it, Hebrew is abandoned. And it's not treated well. And the Hebrew language is crying out to me and saying, why are my children treating me in that way? God's Spirit moved me to try to raise the holy, what shall I say, menorahs, candles of the Hebrew language, so that everybody will know Lashon HaKodesh Ein Aruch Lo. The Jewish language is the top one, not the Arabic. But no Mashalom Sakim Lilo. The Jewish language has the ability, although most Jews don't know how to use it, to display the most sweet of parables and the most pure of diction and words. He could call it Tadekahalo. Notice, in the hand of somebody who knows what he's doing, Hebrew, instead of looking like a disheveled old hag, which is what it looks like, he says, looks like a beautiful kala. Hachamudus mi leho, reka chamor b'shuleho. All done up and with perfume. If only we would take the veil off of her, the veil of poverty, right? Everybody would fall in love with her. But we Jews don't know Hebrew. The greatest people would be captivated by a Regibe Krav Chalel, and she would fell myriads with her beauty. She'd be like an Eitz Chaim B'cham Chalel. We make kedem. And in the old days, what's happened to us Jewish people? In the old days, the great people of the past, like Dovid HaMelech, found refuah through the words of the Hebrew language. And now our stupid Jews stab the bride with daggers, meaning they stabbed them by speaking Hebrew poorly. Every time you hear somebody try to speak Hebrew today, they're murdering the kala, as they say. But once upon a time, righteousness dwelled in Hebrew. Once upon a time, you had guys like Dovid HaMelech, and now you have the Shliach Tzipor. Okay? And her children abandoned her and have become inarticulate. But her good money has become counterfeit. And Hebrews crying. And all ears don't listen. Why what do you find wrong with me? That you abandoned me? Wasn't I the medium when God Almighty spoke to you at Mount Sinai? Did he talk English? The most important things in the world were conveyed to you through me. Aren't I something worth attention? What were the tablets written in? What language were the luchas written in? When God was, when they had a base of Mikdash and the Shechina dwelt in the temple, I was the one that was there. There's all the signs in the base of Mikdash. Hebrew, if the Shechina ever spoke, it was spoken in Hebrew language. Okay, Lahagilom Sodo, give it sodas. And now, Benechem, the children, meaning the Jews nowadays, have Vir Lashon Kedar Lashon Yisrael. They've abandoned Hebrew for the Arabic, for the Lashon Kedar. They did what the brothers did to Joseph. Let's sell him for 20 pieces to the Ishmaelim. Isn't that what happened to Joseph? And he sent for a slave in Egypt? And like Joseph, they threw me into a pit to be eaten by scorpions. Right? He goes on and on about this. He does it. I can't spend all evening on it. The point is that this represents the notion that Hebrew's been abandoned, it has to be revived. And it can be revived, and we'll shove it down the Arab, right down their throat. Okay? You think the Arabic's a joke. It's junk compared to real Lashon Kodesh. This was quite a statement. These Jewish intellectuals wanted a clean and beautiful Hebrew. Not the linguistically promiscuous Hebrew one encounters in the Talmud and the Piyutim with the strange words and the Latin and Greek and Persian words which are interspersed throughout the texts. And so they started, in Spain, by inventing dikduk to get a scientific definition of what Hebrew is, what the rules are. They weren't taking it back by the absence of dikduk in earlier times. After all, who invented what we call today Jewish grammar? A bunch of guys in the 9 and 1000s in Spain. It didn't exist before. Now, obviously, I must not be right because people spoke Hebrew. There had to be some kind of rules. But there's no mention of anything in the Bible, the Talmud, or any of these ways about the right way and the wrong way of doing it. You see? And how come in Spain, in these times of Rishonim, in 9 and 10, 1100s, all of a sudden there's this tremendous interest in people. We got to revive Hebrew, dust it off, as they say, beautify the bride, give her a bath, get her some jewelry, get her some nice clothes. First, we have to have a definition of what terms are. Once they established dikduk, they moved to poetry, a term which included shiri chol, shiri kodesh. Secular poetry, sacred poetry, to show that Hebrew can do anything, which is why you find the great poets of Spain. Some they have love poems, they have war poems, they have this poems, and also they have tefillos. Right? Shirei Kodesh means liturgical poetry, piyutim. The great Meshorei Sfarad, as we call them, created an ocean of poems meant to be included in the davening. This is particularly true of the big three, which is that the next one? No, it's coming up. He said the big three, which is Shlomo ben Gaviro, Yehuda Levi, and Moshe ben Ezra. These guys turned out, I would say, altogether 1,000 poems, if not more. To this day, in 2014, they're discovering in Leningrad, or now St. Petersburg, in that treasure trove from the Gunsberg Library, new unpublished poems of Yehuda Levi. Imagine that. That's like somebody discovering a new play by Shakespeare. What about the existing piyutim? They were already there, of Kalir. Toss them out. They're junk. In Sfarad, in Spain, Kalir became a dirty word, the personification of the bad old Hebrew, the symbol of the decadent past when the Jews allowed themselves to fall behind the Arabs. But Baruch Hashem, these bad old piyutim are now being replaced by a truly magnificent set of beautiful poems in rich, perfectly understandable and grammatical biblical Hebrew, which is the very language of God himself and his inspired prophets. Not from the Romans and the Greeks and this other stuff. And indeed, anybody who knows anything about medieval Jewish poetry, here's a couple of fat books on the subject, knows that the poems are self-evidently magnificent, grammatically pure, a pleasure to read, uplifting the synagogue service to an aesthetic experience for anyone who takes the time and trouble to read and understand them. Even the meter is pure. Here's what I always like to point to. This is from Moshe ben Ezra, one of the greatest, the Salchanim, in Spain in the 1000s. These are the tough guys. And this is meant to be said, obviously, when you say, Kadosh, 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 Hashem Amel Agadol in Shachris, before Krishma, right? And the whole congregation is supposed to sing this together. And even the rhyme and the meter works perfectly. Because imagine everybody there. Listen to this. Malachim, Mamlichim, Marisim, B'chol Peyot, Magdishim, Marishim, Margishim, Barov Tzuot, No Ra'im, Ve'ein Nerim, Niflaim, Ve'niflaot, Kadosh, 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 Adosh Tiva'ot. It all works. And it works for all of them. And therefore, they're rocking. You go to a shul in 1100 in Cordoba, right? And then they look and it says, Otz Kotzit, to them, like, oh my God, like whatever happened. I mean, how do we the old decadent Judaism, you see? And so they, so to speak, vacuum cleaned the siddur and the machzor and the kinos of the old stuff, and they replaced it with what they considered the new and the better improved. It's pure Hebrew. It's correct. And like the Arabs, they can make a rhyme. And they can do the iambic pentameter, all that sort of thing. And it's from. What's he talking? He's describing you in heaven. The malachim running around, right? Hamon edim, maridim, bregish yarid soel, hamul losam, kedushalam. If you take the trouble to read what it says, the angels gathered together in heaven, they recite the praise of the Lord, and so forth. It's like, wow. And this is not the best, but it's a very good one. So you can imagine the good ones. Now, what gives you the right to criticize earlier generations? I thought in Judaism that's not a frum thing to do. In an organic response to this query, an entire hashkafa, entire ideology or sensibility formed in Spain, even in Baghdad under Saadia Gaon. Among other things, Saadia Gaon pioneered biblical commentary. He lived in the 900s, and before him, there's basically no Mefarshim. Isn't that interesting? Right? In the time of where was Rashi in the time of the Gemara? Right? Yeah, you had Targums, which is, are very bare and chaste, and they primarily are into translation, although they give you a little bit of interpretation, and it's not really a pshat-oriented kind of thing. The whole world of what we call medieval parshanut, the kind of things you all use for Dvar Torahs, isn't that right? Rashi, Ramban, Ibn Ezra, they're all from the Middle Ages. They didn't exist in the good old days. And who started the ball rolling? Who's the first one to write what we call today Mefarshim on the Tanakh, Saadia Gaon? And when he does so, among his most striking commentaries, in Arabic, by the way, are those on Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. And among his commentary on Nehemiah, he translates the pasuk that I started you out with tonight. that the children spoke half Ashdod and half, the other language. He translates and explains the problem was a lack of linguistic soundness on the part of the children of the intermarried. That's where the Rambam gets it from the Sadigon tradition, because the Rambam, my friends, is a Sephardic Jew. And he's an heir to all the cultural trends that I just described to you before. The Rambam lived when Sephardi Judaism crashed because the Taliban took over, at that time called the Almohads. Right? A new type of Islam came over that said, we'll kill all the Jews that they practice Judaism. So either you become a Muslim or leave the country, and the Rambam, did a little both. And the point is that he carried his Sephardic traditions and sensibilities to all the places that he lived in afterwards. And therefore you have this notion, this high sensitivity to correct and proper expression of Hebrew. Those, not that you need to know this, but those who care to know that when the Rambam writes the Mishnah Torah, knows the Hebrew is always very correct. He doesn't make grammatical mistakes. Other Rishonim do. It's almost the hallmark of rabbinic literature, they write bad Hebrew from the dictic point of view. You understand? And to create new forms, and not these people. Now, an entire philosophy, what they call Lashon Tzacha, language that is tzach, clear and pure like limpidly pure water, evolved. It's not the first time in Jewish history, but it's not so often. Long ago, the Talmud says Rabbi Nasi complained about Yiddish, right? Or what passed for Yiddish at that time. Wherever Jews live, they evolve until America, and wherever Jews live, they evolve their own kind of dialect. It was Judeo-Arabic, Judeo-Persian, Judeo-this, Judeo-Greek. They really are. Their own little languages. And that's a certain type. But Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, we know, said, Hani Lashon Sursi Lomali, O Ivrit, O Yvanit. He said, I don't like this Yiddish business. Either speak Hebrew properly or speak Greek properly, like we would say today. Talk English or talk Hebrew. Don't give me some... This is a battle of sensibilities that will never go away. In the Gemara in Meruba, in Bava Kama, I just saw the other day, Rabbi Yosef, I think, said the same thing about Iranian, for crying out, oh my God, right? He says, Hani Lashon Sursi Lomali, either speak Persian correctly or speak Ivrit. You see? And these people representing the idea, many are familiar with the fact that the maid of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, his housemaid, was such a master of Hebrew that the rabbis used to come and try to find out what the words mean by listening to her speak. Meaning, he was that, OCD on the subject that, everything has to be exactly correct Hebrew, and he's trying to get a point across. Now, I don't know. It could be a result of the fact that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and the Nasi, they used to had to learn pure Greek in order to deal with the government. The Gemara said the Shalbeis Rabbi Ha'ilamdin Chachmas Yavanis, which means pure Greek, in order to deal with the Romans. Therefore, once you're exposed to a highfalutin language, then your Yiddish doesn't do it anymore. You see? Now, in this sensibility, I'm sure my father's kicking me right now. He says, in this sensibility, the worst thing was not to be tzach, not to be pure. And the kalir was not tzach. It's a funny Hebrew. And so kalir and his works were banned. An entire sweeping and systematic criticism of kalir was leveled by Abba ibn Ezra, the great Ibn Ezra, who's one of the great, not the greatest, of the Spanish Jewish poets. He wrote his commentary on Koheles, Ibn Ezra did, on the pasuk which says, Al tavayel picha v'libcha al yamayir lahotzi davar lefnei kilchim b'shamayim v'aretz al yikin dvarach mishamim. Be not rash with your mouth, and let your heart not be hasty to utter a word before the Lord. It can mean a lot of things, but I'll tell you what he says it means. It means before you start writing a Hebrew, once you master the subject. Okay? And my goodness, he tears into the kalir in a big way. And I'll read you just a small piece of it. You can see I collapsed a lot of it into a whole... It's a long piece of 5 or 6 pages I have in front of me. I'm not going to read it all. But he says that if somebody wants to write poems or people, do it right. Yesh b'yuti kalir arba dvarim kal. The kalir poem have 4 basic defects. Number 1, rov piyutav chidus u'mishalim. You don't know what it means. A poem, you're supposed to say what it means. You know? Oh Lord, we beg you today to have mercy on the Beis HaMikdash. Yeah. And he even goes on to say, look at Shlomo Melech. He was a smart guy, wasn't he? Look at the prayer he composed when the temple was here. It's not full of illusions that you have to figure from the Yerushalmi Yavamas what this means and what that means. Say clear diburim. Number 2, Piyuta Murab Melashon Talmud. He has a lot of Talmudic expressions which is offensive to the Hebrew sensibility. Because Yesh Kamal Lashon V'Talmud Melashon Kodesh. right? The Talmud is full of all kind of funny words which aren't Hebrew at all. And they don't belong in the Siddur. Isn't this a funny thing? Usually they say, oh, if it's in the Gemara, then it's great. Not to the person that cares about linguistic purity and all that sort of thing. What's the third item? Right? The Kalir poem, they have a lot of dictic mistakes. And he goes on to name them all out there. You can't murder the Hebrew language. Right? I mean, look how long the the item is. What's his fourth one? Shekol piyutim aleim midrashas v'agodos. They're elusive. You have to know the Gemara, you have to know the Medrash Rabbah, you have to know the Yerushalmi, as we saw before. Who knows that in the synagogue? Who are you writing for? Right? Is it a crossword puzzle? Who are you writing for? It's supposed to be a prayer that somebody goes to the shul and talks to God. So what's the business of, Oh, ding, I got that. Did you notice the fourth word there? That doesn't work, he says, when it comes to prayers. So I'm just trying to show you that he went ahead and was pretty, strong on the subject. Now, let me get back to my words over here. So, here we go. This was a very Sephardic medieval sensibility. In Ashkenaz and in Byzantium, they went in their merry way. The heck with grammar, poetry, and sachos. This is what my Zaidi did. This is what my grandchildren are going to do. Thank you very much. So different Piyutim went on. And so if you go to old Germany from long ago, they didn't know about this new stuff that I'm talking about. You said, Utz, Kotzeitz, and all the rest of it. What does it mean? Fair face. I'm going to ask you a question. When you get up 6 in the morning, whenever, on Slichas, and I'm giving you the credit of thinking you all do, he said, you get a Slichas. Do you know really what you're saying? Right? Or did you know before the art school published the translations? Or things like that? But they did. Let me ask you a better question. Did your grandparents, did great-grandparents do it? Did they know what they were saying over there? You get up and you say Slichas. That's kind of... In Sepharad, they said, but what are you saying? Got to know what you mean. And anyway, the Hebrew's wrong. Let's redo it. And so, different piyutim for different Jewish civilizations. The Sepharad culture crystallized by the time of the Rambam, and that's why he has that interpretation I gave you before, that the whole invention of formal prayer, the Shemona Esrei, is to respond to the history of prayer in terms of tzach and ileg, those who know Hebrew correctly and those who know Hebrew incorrectly. And Ezra couldn't stand, because Ezra was Sephardic, of course, right? So he said, Ezra couldn't stand the fact that these children who grew up Nebuch without knowing Hebrew were talking to God in the wrong way, with bad Hebrew. Okay? By the generation after the Rambam, it was a science. Al-Kharizi has actual rules for correct poetry. Yesh l'shir shiva tanoim. V'yinam. It's late, so I won't go. He says there are 7 things that you have to know in order to write a poem, and if you don't do it, then it'll turn into something that's worthy of being trampled. The first one is you have to get rid of all the foreign words. No Aramaic, thank you. No Greek and no Latin. You understand? What's the second one? Lishma mishkal shir tunos. It's got to rhyme. It's got to have the right meter. Thank you very much. Let's move to the next one. It's got to be chazakim. The images have to be strong and gripping, not highly elusive. You know what they're talking about. What's the fourth one? They have kalim lahavin, easy Hebrew. Number 5, shar lishmar mitosa diktuk. No diktuk mistakes. Thank you very much. And he's got a whole thing of that. And look at the next one, which is really great. Here, look at this one. Edit yourself. Right? At Kalir, you just publish everything and send that. Edit yourself. Cut out 3/4. L'mishar livchar mishirasa ksasa v'yashlich itzasa. You keep a little, but it's very hard for somebody, especially a poet, to edit themselves. Moi? Right? V'yivchalo min ha'chamishim shloshim min ha'shivim arboim. Right? Cut everything down by 50%, 40%, whatever, to do so. So it turns into a whole science. All this lasted, my friends, as long as the Sephardim lived in Spain. When they were kicked out after 1492, they ended up in the Ottoman Empire. And then so they moved from here to here, the Turkish Empire. And then the Sephardim underwent a lot of significant changes. Okay? In general, the Sephardim moved to the right. In terms of their religious culture, you might say the Haskalah of Spain faded. No more poets, grammarians, scientists, and philosophers in Turkey. Thank you very much. Instead, you have the masses, the Gemara and Halacha types, and especially the Mekubalim, the Kabbalists. The 16th century, after all, is the famous era of Kabbalah. And what's the Kabbalistic take on prayer? The mystical one? You're not talking to God. God's not some guy up in heaven. God's beyond imagining. Pinch yourself before you say Shemona Esrei. You can't imagine him, and yet you pray to him. Obviously, the words Gadol, Geber, Vanora don't literally mean like he's great, because God's beyond, all that. So how am I supposed to understand it? What do you want from the regular person? Or petitionary prayer. You say, someone prays like this, send me money, send me this. Well, that's what you're talking about. How do you know? First of all, I'll tell you on 2 levels. First of all, how do you even know what to ask for? The classic story we always read about in the book. The guy says, "Dear Lord, don't let me miss the train." Well, it's a good thing you missed the train, like with the other day in Malaysia, right? The plane crash. So how do you even know what you're asking for? You say, send me, I should win the Powerball lottery. Yeah, it'll tear your family apart. How do you know what to ask for? So now all of a sudden, say, well, then what am I supposed to do? It says, Rifleinu Baruch Aleinu. Rethink it, my friends. The mystic says, don't just read it like a dummy. And then if you want to go to a higher madrega, you say like this. He says, you want God to do your thing? You should be the other way around. What you want is what I want. Right? The person, real evidence, if you want me to have misfortune, I know this is your will, thy will be done. It's the best. It's what it should be. But you tell it to somebody and say, what? I'm leaving the show. Like, I'm coming here because I want money. I want health, and so forth. Elamai, the words of tefillah have to be reconceived as a kind of Kabbalistic code far beyond the understanding of the average worshiper. You're dealing with the siddur has to be rethought, reimagined. If this is so, the words of the tefillah are not just nice, clear words designed to make the masses articulate. The words of the tefillahs are kodesh kadoshim lamaychel misechel anoshi, beyond what you can understand. And not just the Shemona Esrei. The Kabbalist said like this, even the ancient piyutim, I repeat, the ancient piyutim, that were recited by our forefathers long, long ago, were written at a time where people are much higher madrega than they are today. The obscure language of Kalir's piyutim are not to be judged by the stupid aesthetic criteria of a mere poet like Ibn Ezra, especially when he was no Kabbalist. Indeed, an entire anti-Ibn Ezra reaction kicked in the 1500s with the Marshal saying he's low Talmudic, he didn't know how to learn, and the others say Ibn Ezra, and because who are these Spanish guys to come and criticize the people before them? So the world turned upside down. Aesthetically pleasing poems, out. Obscure, in. This was intensified by the Arizal, who was recorded as saying that the tefillahs of Chazal have infinite Kabbalistic depth, meaning they weren't poets. When you read in the Shemona Esrei, they're not just good talkers. The way the Rambam says that they articulate language. Rifleinu, the resh means this, and the pei means that, and the word refers to X and Y and Z. This is, these are great rebbes know how to do this sort of thing, and it's not for you. And he included the piyutim of Kalir in the infinite depth category. So you say, but the Hebrew's bad. Oh, you dumbbell. What do you think you're talking about? A 6th grade textbook, You're talking about Shemona Esrei. Consequently, they are worthy of inclusion in the liturgy. By contrast, the great Spanish poems were notoriously non-Kabbalists. Yehuda Levi, Ibn Gabiro, Moshe ben Ezra, Avram ben Ezra. These are the great rationalist era in Spain. And so Terry and the other Kabbalists, poem is nice if you have the time to waste on poetry, But we have infinite stuff here in the tefillahs and the holy books. They were members of the glorious age of rationalism, when secular historians refer to as the golden age of Spanish Jewry. It's Nigla, not Nister. But the Rambam to a Kabbalist is not so simple at all, because he wasn't into this sort of thing. So when he's explaining halacha, all right, but don't look to him for the infinite depth category. Consequently, the poems of the Mesharei Sfarad, as aesthetically pretty as they were bereft of any Kabbalistic kedusha, was felt. Accordingly, they were fatally flawed. They were unworthy of inclusion in the sacred liturgy. By the 1600s, a process began among the Sephardim, who had become Kabbalaized, to decouple the beautiful medieval Sephardic piyutim because of perception that they're pretty and not holy. In addition, the Sephardic piyutim were whipsawed by another cultural development after 1492. As I told you, the Sephardim didn't produce maskilic types anymore. They produced, if I can use the term, Avodah Yosef types. Right? In other words, great, elites of Shas and Poskim, rich Jews and Shas, who were ignorant, and Shas and Poskim Jews like Yosef Kar and the Chidah. Famous pictures that are not real. These rabbis were activated by a halachic sensibility, which never liked piyutim anyway in the middle of davening. Right? Under their influence, the Sephardi classic piyutim bit the dust out of halachic aesthetics over the course of the 16 and 1700s. First in Algeria, and then in Constantinople, and then in Damascus, and, you want to follow that sort of thing. So the history of piyutim is a merry-go-round. At base, however, lies the fact, and I'm coming to my conclusion, that Judaism is a wide phenomenon and contains competing sensibilities, including competing notions of prayer. On the one hand, prayer is perceived as actual plain speech. You're talking to God the way you talk to another person, or perhaps the way you talk to a king, with all the implications for kavanah and decorum. After all, you're not really supposed to go like this when you daven, right? According to the Shulchan Aruch, it was to stand at attention like you would do in front of a king. No, I'm not making that up. It really is there. A plain reading of Scripture yields this picture. That's how, the Avos seem to talk to God. And Rishonim, like the Rambam, understand the Iker Mitzvah D'Oraisa of Tefillah to be precisely this. You say, Rifleinu, I'm sick, help me. That's the way he set it up. Hence, the Rambam's presentation of history of Tefillah, especially the role of the Anshe and Esek in formulating an actual liturgy. In this scheme, petitionary prayer is normal and appropriate. In such a view, the better formed the prayer, the more appropriate they are, the better fitted they are to their honorable role in religious life. On the other hand, prayer is perceived by others, as I said before, Divrei Kabbalah, Moli Yesodus Al Noshim. It's Kabbalistic, it's superhuman. I mean that in the sense it's beyond anybody's real understanding, and certainly, everybody should aim for getting how much they can, but it's beyond the understanding of most people. Prayer itself is a paradox, but it's a glorious paradox. It's a paradox, though. God cannot be conceived, and yet you pray to him. Whatever image you conceive of when you're davening as the recipient of your prayers is necessarily a false image, and yet prayer is one of the 630 mitzvahs. Moreover, the petitionary nature of prayers is inappropriate, as I told you before. The best thing you want from God is God's will be done, whether good or bad for you, quote unquote, because he knows better than you. Accordingly, although the language seems straightforwardly petitionary, it isn't. It's a mystical code that most of us cannot really decode, but you have to take on faith that's constructed in the best possible manner for us. Because we're not a Rizals, we're not a million miles from that. Hence the notion of the sacred content and the form of the prayers, and the resistance to tampering with them and updating or revising them. Welcome, my friends, to the battles of orthodoxy versus reform and conservative in the last 200 years. If the language, particularly the language of the piyutim, seems obscure, bizarre, that's indicative of their great sanctity. Okay? And finally, with this I really conclude this is the most popular of all the notions, which says, disregard everything I've said tonight. Just talk, as they say, to Tata and Himmel. Just talk to God, your Father in heaven. Not like a king before whom stands in awe, but like a baby, like a child, even demanding a candy from a father. Many know Rabbi Weinberg is famous the story that they walked in his house, and he heard a guy walked to Rabbi Weinberg's house. They're talking about something. He hears upstairs, he's saying, I want a candy now. And he couldn't understand what's going on. And somebody upstairs was asking him, how do you daven? Right? And he said, this is how you daven. I want money. I want this. I need a shidduch. What about all the Kabbalah? That's true. It's true. But here's how you daven over here. It's actually a famous rivash, cited, famous opinion by one of the greatest of the Rishonim in Spain. Rivash Yitzhak ben Sheshet, one of the great rabbis, the great rabbis of Spain. And very famously, in a tshuva, in one of his responses, he says, Gamo derticha, I want you to know, because the guy was writing him, how do you pray Kabbalistically? Do you pray to the Spheros? You do this, you do that. He said, I want you to know, even though the Rivash knows the Kabbalah, and he's a Talmud Ramban, and all that, Ki Mori Rav Peretz HaKohen, my Rebbe, who was a big person, Rav Peretz HaKohen, in Spain in the 1300s, Lo Yiklam Medaber V'lo Machshav B'Osa Spheros. He never spoke about the Spheros, even though he knew all that stuff. Gam Shamatim Mipiv, and I heard from him, Rav Shimshon Kinon, one of the big rabbis in old France. In other words, big Rishonim. Rav Gadol Mikol B'nei Dor. He was the Gadol Ador. And I remember he said, meaning the biggest rabbi in the world said like this, I daven like a child. Ani mispalel l'daz ze'atinu, Rabbi Weinberg. You get it? Now he knew all the stuff that I just told you. He knows a lot better than I do. He knows a lot better than everything do you understand today. And he knew all the heavy duty depth and all the rest of it. But when he davened, he said, I daven like 8-year-old. You see? This happens to be the way my mother used to daven. And you'll see it by this concluding piece of like a 3-minute piece that I took off the internet, because my mother, like many of the Holocaust survivors, was Steven Spielberg. Okay, and but in my mother's case, he talked a long time. So if you want to listen, it's like a 2-hour business, And that was the short version, because she remembered everything from the war, everything, every detail. And I'm just going to set this up, and then I'll let her talk over here. She had a lot of very difficult and challenging times in 1944, particularly after my brother was born. And you'll see that she, in the middle of the war, she gave him a bris, which was like a kiss of death, right? Because in Germany, you can look at a baby and that's it. And I have to tell you even a better story before I proceed. I only found this out a year ago. Maybe I mentioned last year. I don't remember. 2 years ago, thanks to Michael Cohn and some newspaper article from San Antonio newspaper, the Czech guy, a Slovak, actually said, he says, I'm 80 years old today. I'm telling my life story, and he was in the same monastery or semi-monastery where my mother was, and she said he didn't know. He doesn't know me. And he said they had a little boy named Peter, which is my brother Ari, and my mother always said like this. She without going all the details, she was working as a maid in this room, hiding, disguised as a Christian, and next room was the SS. And when she was doing the laundry, the SS officer would come out and flirt with her as soldiers do, flirt with the washerwoman. And what about the child who was Ari was a summer, so he just had a diaper on, as people do, throw the baby up in the air, ha, ha, ha. And she's like this, if the pin falls off, I'm dead. You understand? And it never fell off. I'm wrong. I was shocked. I read this, I think maybe 2 years ago now, in this newspaper. It's online. The guy said like this. He said that there was some big SS officer. My mother didn't know this. Some big SS officer, this is for a movie, who made an inspection, and he looked at the kids, and he did take off the diaper. Listen to this. And he saw as a circumcised, oh boy, and he went to the Mother Superior, Maria Rafaeva. She was a Protestant, but it was like Mother Superior, and he was about to get them all arrested. This is a story that this Czech guy writes. And when he walked in, she was very pious Christian, and she was reading a book called The Great Bridge, or some name like that, which is a very famous Protestant work apparently. And he said like this, wow, my mother in Germany reads this book every day also. His mother very religious. And he said, because of that, I'm going to let you off, but you better watch out. You're treading on dangerous territory over here. Next person come along, not going to do what I did. And so he's even more of a nice. So the point is that she was running from pillar to post before she ended up in the place I just described. She had a baby, and baby needs a doctor, correct? Yeah. Anybody's a parent knows you're going to get earaches, you're going to disinfection, especially Ari was born in August of 44. So we're talking about August, September, October of 44. So it's a brand new baby. How do you show a doctor anywhere? As soon as they see the child circumcised, they're going to tell the police. They have to. And so she asked friends of hers, and they found this one female, a baby doctor, Dr. Rochkova, who was a famous Protestant and all the rest of it. And she did it. She asked my mother, said, what'd you circumcise it for? So the rest I'll let her tell the story.
I'm the interviewer. Mrs. Katz, during the time that you were in hiding at Paula's house, did Peter, your baby, ever get sick?
Yes, matter of fact, he got sick maybe 2 days after I arrived. And I didn't know what to do. You couldn't take the child to just any doctor because he had a bris. He was circumcised. So it just popped into my mind. I knew of a woman pediatrician, and I asked Paula to go and fetch her. And Christina came in, not at the right moment, and she said, I'm going with her. So she came, Dr. Rohachkova, Vera Rohachkova was her name, and she examined the baby and she gave me the prescription. And then she sat down to talk to me because she examined me. She knew as a doctor what circumcision is. She pointed to the bris, and she said, why did you do it at a time like this? So I told her this is a commandment that we have to obey, and I felt that first I obey, and then I have the right to ask God He should protect me. So she sat down and she said, I want you to know that I'm a daughter of an evangelist minister, and I want you to come to my office with the baby whenever you need it, and even for regular checkups. And if I see you in the waiting room, I'll take you in first so you would not be just by chance discovered. And so I went to her maybe twice. I was afraid to go out because I could bump into any time into a Nazi who knew me from the office, from the former jobs. And she was later on of so much help. She actually saved my life and that of my child.
So as you see, I don't know if it's a petitionary prayer or other kind of prayer, but that's the old-fashioned school. And with that, I conclude. And I was hoping that we would, as I say a prayer for the three boys. Unfortunately, we had bad news today, but we have to pray for the situation in Israel and for Jewish unity, especially under these pressures, and for all who are facing health and other issues. And as you see, it does work. And you have the craziest stories, but they are true. And however you understand the power of prayer and whatever your particular predilection is towards this sort or that sort, it still remains the basic pillar of our life as Jews. And with that, I bid you good night.